Today on the Word Preacher podcast, passing the mantle to Elisha, miracles in the days of Elisha, and the fulfillment of Elijah's assignments on Horeb. I'm Brett Jensen, and this is the Word Preacher podcast. Our Come Follow Me curriculum for this coming week will bring us to 2 Kings, the first part of 2 Kings. The manual gives a very small window and kind of cuts out a lot of stuff. We're going to kind of expand our window a little bit and talk about some of the things that led up and surround the main Come Follow Me reading. For example, 2 Kings chapter 1, amazing. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, reigned in the stead of his father. And he fell through a lattice at his home, and he becomes sick after this injury. So he sends some servants to go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, as to whether he's going to recover. Now, of course, this is... this other god is essentially it's the same thing that Jezebel set up, this Baal worship. It's absolute nonsense. The house of Ahab is ripe for destruction. Elijah intercepts the messengers of King Ahaziah and declares to them, "Is it not because there is no God in Israel that ye go to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Now therefore thus saith the Lord, thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but thou shalt surely die." So the king was not thrilled with this. He figures out that it's Elijah that interfered with his command. So he sends a captain of 50 with 50 men, and they're going to go hunt down Elijah. They find Elijah on this hill, and the captain shouts out, "O man of God, come down. The king has told thee to come down." And Elijah says in response, "If I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And fire fell from heaven, consumed the man and his 50. So the king sent another captain with 50 more men, and the same thing happened, burned them all. So the king, figures third time's a charm, sends another captain, but this captain's a little more concerned for his well-being. He pleads for his life. "Let my life be precious in thy sight." And the angel that speaks to Elijah gives him permission to go down to the king. And Elijah tells the king to his face that he's not going to recover, but is going to die. That's the end of the story. Ahaziah dies. Just amazing. Elisha loved Elijah, and he wanted to stay with him as he prophesied. He could tell that this was a person who was dedicated to following the Lord. Now, the scriptures indicate that the prophets of the Lord all kind of had some knowledge that on a particular day, Elijah was going to be taken away. He was going to be taken by the Lord. Elijah is traveling with Elisha, and they come to the Jordan River. Elijah takes off his mantle, twists it up, and hits the Jordan River. The water departs, and they walk across on dry land. This is kind of similar to both crossing through the Red Sea and also Joshua parting the Jordan River when they went across to get to Jericho. So you can tell that there's a model here. Elijah is not just a guy who had some good spiritual thoughts. This is someone who has a prophetic call, authority over other prophets. And everyone recognized that. Elijah keeps telling Elisha, it's not good for you to be with me. You should go. Elisha doesn't want to hear that. He insists on coming with him. And Elijah finally asks, well, what do you even want? And Elisha asks, a double portion of his spirit. He wants to be like the prophet. This is a noble aspiration. And this is what the scriptures say in 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 10 through 15. And he said, thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee. But if not, it shall not be so. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire, and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof, and saw him no more. And he took hold of his own clothes, and rent them in 2 pieces. And he took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back, and stood by the bank of Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and smote the waters, and said, where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he had also smitten the waters, they parted hither and thither. And Elisha went over. And when the sons of the prophets, which were to view at Jericho, saw him, they said, the spirit of Elijah doth rest on Elisha. And they came to meet him, and bowed themselves to the ground before him. So the passing of a prophetic mantle is a symbol that's used even today. The Lord will one day raise up a Moses, and after his time raise up a Joshua to replace him. The same was done with Elijah and Elisha, or Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. We honor prophets, but it's because the Lord was the one who asked us to hear their words, and because they are authorized to speak to us, saying, thus saith the Lord. All right, so Elisha becomes the prophet, the authoritative leader of the congregation at that time. And immediately, a bunch of youths come and mock him for being bald. These are not small children. These are older guys, possibly of age, maybe not. They're young. For whatever reason, they're harassing him. So Elisha calls 2 she-bears, and they tear 42 of them. Maybe Elisha's bald, but kind of let him do what he needs to do. This is an important precedent that Elisha was not exactly a respecter of persons. If you had some social or political office, he didn't really care about that. He cared whether or not the Lord wanted him to do something. Now, sometimes there is some overlap, and there's a very good example of this when Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, comes, and after the conflict of previous generations, Jehoshaphat is trying to make peace with Israel, between Judah and Israel. And there's a threat. An insurrection has come. And so there are 3 kings that are meeting together. The king of Israel is not really thrilled about the situation. And Jehoshaphat says this, starting in verse 11 of 2 Kings 3. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not a prophet of the Lord, that we may inquire of the Lord by him? And one of the king of Israel's servants answered and said, here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, which poured water on the hands of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. And Elisha said unto the king of Israel, what have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father, and to the prophets of thy mother. And the king of Israel said unto him, nay, for the Lord hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. And Elisha said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, Surely, were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, I would not look toward thee nor see thee. Harsh words, but it goes to the point that the political things change all the time. But God abides forever. So let's talk about some of the other miracles that occurred in Elisha's days. There was a widow who, her sons were going to be taken as slaves to pay a debt that she owed. And all she had was one pot of oil. Elisha had compassion on her, told her to go to her neighbors, borrow all the empty vessels that she could find, and pour from her pot of oil into them. Miraculously, she didn't run out of oil. She filled all of these things with oil. And she was able to sell that oil to pay the debt, save her sons, and use the extra to provide for her family. There's a Shunammite woman whose son passed away, died, and Elisha raised the child from the dead. There was an instance when people were worried about poisoned food. Elisha instructed the people that they could eat of this poisoned food, and no harm came to them. There was a man who had borrowed an axe. The iron head of the axe had sunk somewhere in the Jordan River, and he didn't know how to find it. Elisha caused the iron to float so that the man could pick it up and return it. Of course, there are also larger miracles that we can talk about with Elisha. Syria rose to great power in the days of Elisha. We'll talk more on that later. But Elisha was approached by a leprous captain of Syria, Naaman. Elisha did not go out to him, but sent his servant Gehazi to instruct him to bathe in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman was not thrilled with this, that he didn't even get to see this prophet. But one of his servants gave him good counsel, suggesting that if the prophet had bid him do some great thing, surely he would have done it. Why not do this small thing? Seeing the wisdom of this counsel, Naaman did it. And as he came out of the Jordan the 7th time, he was cleansed. Now, Naaman came back to Elisha to offer him great rewards, and Elisha was not interested in the rewards and sent him away. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, lusted after that reward that Naaman had offered. So, thinking that he could do this in private, he ran out, chased Naaman down, and asked for just a few items that Elisha had changed his mind about. And Naaman happily gave. When Gehazi came back, Elisha knew exactly what Gehazi had done. And Gehazi was cursed with Naaman's leprosy. So eventually, in the course of time, Syria finds out that part of the reason they aren't prevailing as much as they would like is because this prophet of the Lord, Elisha, is prophesying their battle strategies. So they send a great host to surround Elisha at Dothan. And so Elisha is there with his servant, and they're surrounded by this huge Syrian army. And his servant gets up in the morning, and this is what it reads. And when the servant of the man of God was arisen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city, both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? And he answered, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed unto the Lord, and said, Smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And he smote them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. And Elisha said unto them, This is not the way, neither is this the city. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom ye seek. But he led them to Samaria. And it came to pass when they were come into Samaria, that Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men, that they may see. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. And the king of Israel said unto Elisha when he saw them, My father, shall I smite them? Shall I smite them? And he answered, Thou shalt not smite them. Wouldest thou smite those whom thou hast taken captive with thy sword and with thy bow? Set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink, and go to their master. And he prepared great provision for them, and when they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away, and they went to their master. So the bands of Syria came no more into the land of Israel. This is a great story that talks about how he could see the bigger picture, not just with being surrounded by protection, but also solving a problem with this war between Syria and Israel that the Lord could take care of without a battle. The Lord was more powerful than any other strategy or army or force that Israel had. And Elisha wasn't really concerned then about the political problems. The Lord was going to take care of those. But what he was concerned with was showing compassion to individuals who needed help. And this is a good pattern to follow. Some of the big picture stuff is beyond our control. But what's going on in your home and with your neighbor, well, that's something maybe you can help with. All right. To close, I'd like to discuss the fulfillment of Elijah's assignments that he received on Horeb. If we recall from last week's podcast, there was a still small voice that came to Elijah on Horeb. And a lot of people make a big deal, oh, it's a still small voice. But the still small voice of the Lord gave him 3 things to do. These were the things. Anoint Elisha the son of Shaphat to be a prophet. Anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And anoint Jehu the son of Nimshi to be king of Israel. Elijah only accomplished one of those before the Lord took him to heaven in a chariot of fire. So Elisha took up the assignment in Syria. And we can read a little about that. And Elisha came to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, was sick. And it was told him, saying, The man of God is come hither. And the king said unto Hazael, Take a present in thine hand, and go meet the man of God, and inquire of the Lord by him, saying, Shall I recover of this disease? So Hazael went to meet him, and took a present with him, even of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camels' burden, and came and stood before him, and said, Thy son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, hath sent me unto thee, saying, Shall I recover of this disease? And Elisha said unto him, Go say unto him, Thou mayest certainly recover, howbeit the Lord hath showed me that he shall surely die. And he settled his countenance steadfastly until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. And Hazael said, Why weepeth my Lord? And he answered, Because I know the evil that thou wilt do unto the children of Israel. Their strongholds wilt thou set on fire, and their young men wilt thou slay with the sword, and wilt dash their children, and rip up their women with child. And Hazael said, But what, is thy servant a dog, that he should do this great thing? And Elisha answered, The Lord hath showed me that thou shalt be king over Syria. So he departed from Elisha, and came to his master, who said to him, What said Elisha to thee? And he answered, He told me that thou shouldest surely recover. And it came to pass on the morrow that he took a thick cloth, and dipped it in water, and spread it on his face, so that he died. And Hazael reigned in his stead. So, kind of underhanded. Lied to the king, killed him, took his place. Now, it's important to note, Syria had had mixed success under Ben-Hadad. They had won some great battles. They had lost several times. Ironically, some of those because of Elisha. Under Hazael, Syria became incredibly powerful. We get an inkling of this in 2 Kings chapter 12, verse 17. Hazael comes to fight against Gath. This is the old Philistine stronghold. It's been there for generations. This is one of the most important cities in the region. You can't go and take Gath. Oh, except Hazael did. And you never hear about the Philistines afterward. This really says something about the power that God put into Syria to accomplish what he wanted to. Hazael even threatened to come down and overthrow Jerusalem, which at that time was reigned over by Joash. And Joash sent much of the wealth of Jerusalem as tribute to Hazael in order to get him to turn back and leave them alone. It really did happen the way that the still small voice of the Lord said to Elijah on Horeb. Of course, then there was the other assignment. Elisha didn't even do that one himself. He delegated another young man, a prophet, who was under him, to go to Ramoth Gilead. And his situation was as follows. And when he came, behold, the captains of the host were sitting. And he said, I have an errand unto thee, O captain. And Jehu said, Unto which of all of us? And he said, To thee, O captain. And he arose and went into the house, and he poured oil on his head, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed thee king over the people of the Lord, even over Israel. And thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door and fled. That's 2 Kings chapter 9. So Joram, the son of Ahab, reigned in Israel, and he was recovering in Jezreel from injuries he had sustained while fighting Syria. Joram was close with Ahaziah, who was the king of Judah. Ahaziah had married Athaliah, a woman of the house of Omri, with ties to Ahab and Jezebel. So they had kind of developed this friendship between Israel and Judah. So Ahaziah, visiting Joram and Jezreel, they were together, and they see Jehu, the son of Nimshi, riding furiously. This is a little bit concerning to Joram. So Joram comes out to see what Jehu is after. And it came to pass, when Joram saw Jehu, that he said, Is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, What peace, so long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many? And Joram turned his hands and fled, and said to Ahaziah, There is treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew a bow with his full strength, and smote Joram between his arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. So when Ahaziah sees the death of Joram, he gets out. He starts to flee. But it's not fast enough. Jehu catches up to him, slays him too. This produces a very fascinating response in the kingdom of Judah, which I absolutely want to talk about, but I'm going to have to do that in a separate podcast. For now, I want to talk about Jezebel's well-deserved end. Jehu comes to Jezreel, and Jezebel hears about it, paints her face, tries to hide, and just calls out the window, "Had Zimri peace, who slew his master?" Of course, Zimri was the old captain who had treasonously killed Elah, the son of Baasha, and reigned for 7 days before giving up and lighting himself on fire. The audacity that Jezebel had to invoke Zimri after all the terror that she had inflicted on Israel. Well, Jehu wasn't interested in having a discussion with her. He called out to the city, "Who is on my side? Who?" And 2 or 3 men peek out, and he calls, "Throw her down." So they threw her out of this high window, and they trode her down with horses, and her blood was sprinkled on the wall. Kind of a grisly scene. They go in, they drink, they celebrate, and then he starts to feel guilty, like, she's a king's daughter, maybe we should bury her. And they went to look for her. They didn't find any more than her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. She had been devoured by dogs. She'd been so quick to deal out death and pain to anyone in Israel who had opposed her. It was a fitting end for Jezebel. Of course, Jehu wasn't done. He continued to clean the house. He sent to the people that cared for Ahab's other 70 sons, and they agreed to slay them and presented their heads in baskets, utterly destroyed all who had enjoyed high places during the reign of Ahab, and then handling the worshippers of Baal that lingered in the land. This is worth reading. I'm going to read this passage that's in 2 Kings chapter 10, starting in verse 18. "And Jehu gathered all the people together and said unto them, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu shall serve him much. Now therefore call unto me all the prophets of Baal, all his servants and all his priests, let none be wanting, for I have a great sacrifice to do to Baal. Whosoever shall be wanting, he shall not live." But Jehu did it in subtlety, to the intent that he might destroy the worshippers of Baal. And Jehu said, "Proclaim a solemn assembly for Baal." And they proclaimed it. And Jehu sent through all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left that came not. And they came to the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was full from one end to another. And he said unto him that was over the vestry, "Bring forth vestments for all the worshippers of Baal." And he brought them forth vestments. And Jehu went, and Jehonadab the son of Rechab, into the house of Baal, and unto the worshippers of Baal, "Search and look that there be here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but the worshippers of Baal only." And when they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings, Jehu appointed 80 men without, and said, "If any of the men whom I have brought into your hands escape, he that letteth him go, his life shall be for the life of him." And it came to pass that as soon as he made an end of offering the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the captains, "Go in and slay them. Let none come forth." And they smote them with the edge of the sword, and the guard and the captains cast them out, and went into the city to the house of Baal. And they brought forth the images out of the house of Baal, and burned them, and brake down the images of Baal, and brake down the house of Baal, and made it a draught house unto this day. Thus Jehu destroyed Baal out of Israel. Though Elijah felt in that moment that he had stood on Horeb, that all had been lost, that Ahab and Jezebel had won, that the worship of Baal had supplanted the worship of the Lord was capable of handling everything. And he didn't even need Elijah there for the whole thing to do it. It's important to remember that the power of the Lord has not waned away with the passing of time. It's not too late. It's not over. He's not too tired to do all of the things that need to be done to make everything right. And while you need not fear and tremble over what the world thinks are big picture issues, taking compassion on those in need, lifting the hands that hang down, as Elisha did, will bring strength and please the Lord. Because the Lord is the one that's ultimately in control, the mantle of his prophet can change from time to time, but the need to follow the prophet will not change. We appreciate all the support for the Word Preacher podcast. Next week, we will be looking at 2 Kings chapters 17 through 25, talking about Hezekiah down to the end of the kings of Judah. There is a mountain of stuff we did not cover. Even though this was a longer podcast, I encourage you, read this material. Study it individually and with your family. And of course, as always, fight on.